So in this video, I'm going to talk about language functions. Now, understanding about language functions and knowing what it means is really useful for teachers. It's really useful because language functions gives us an idea about target language. Often target language has a function, but also it helps us to understand grammar. Okay, so grammar exists within communication, and when we're communicating, we have a function for communicating. So that is why language functions are useful to understand. So what are language functions? Well, we use language to communicate, and we use language for a reason. So language functions are the purposes of why we are communicating. Okay, so when we communicate, there's a reason for our communication, and the reason for the communication is the function of why we are using this language. Okay, so let's have a look at some information about this. Now, I have to mention that one of the original academics that came up with this idea of language functions is Halliday. Okay, so if you look into language functions online, you'll often find references to Halliday. And he identified these macro functions of language. So I think we should start with this. Okay, so let's have a look at his macro functions. First is instrumental, language used to fulfill a need on the part of the speaker. Next is regulatory, language used to influence the behavior of others. Interactional, language used to develop social relationships. Personal, language used to express the personal preferences and identity of the speaker. Representational, language used to exchange information. Heuristic, language used to learn and explore the environment. And finally, imaginative, language used to explore the imagination. So Halliday identified these 7 macro functions. Now, there are other theories about language functions. There are other lists of categories, but possibly the most commonly referenced is Halliday. So it is I thought it would be good to start with this. Now, these are the macro functions. And I would suggest for language teachers, it's useful to know this information and it helps us to understand about language functions. But actually for language teachers, it's more useful to understand about the micro functions, because when we're teaching, we're often dealing with these little aspects of language and developing these different parts of a learner's language. So the micro functions of language, now there are many, possibly thousands. Okay, so I've just put a few examples here of micro functions. We use language for comparing. We use language for persuading, for asking opinions, for expressing our likes and dislikes, for suggesting, for summarizing, for encouraging, for predicting, for agreeing and disagreeing, for greeting people and introducing. Okay, so these are some common micro functions. And if you look at textbooks, if you look at the contents page of a textbook, you'll often find references to language functions in EFL syllabi or textbooks, because language functions is a good way of organizing language and a good way of selecting target language expressions and giving target language and grammar some meaning and some purpose. Okay. So those are some examples of micro functions. And I've got an example here. I've just selected one specific micro function. Actually, I'll show you the book. It's from this book called Function in English. It's a bit of an old book, but this book has lists and lists of language functions, and it also gives you lots of expressions for each language function. Okay. I'll mention actually while I'm showing you this book, language functions, this idea was developed in the 60s and the 70s, and actually language functions is what led to communicative language teaching. Okay, so language functions is kind of the bridge between the traditional grammar-focused grammar translation method and the common modern kind of way of looking at language, which is communicative language teaching and task-based language teaching. Language functions was kind of the bridge between those two developments in language teaching. So so this focus on language functions through the 60s and 70s helped TESOL develop. Anyway, so let's have a look at this language function here, asking if someone is interested. So here are some different expressions. What are your interests? What are you interested in? Are you keen on? Are you a fan of? Do you find interesting? Notice these are different forms or different grammar, but the function is the same, okay? So different grammar forms can have the same function. So that's a really useful and important thing to understand as a teacher and as a learner, that different forms can have the same function, and even different functions can have the same forms, okay? So let's have a look at that. So here are some examples of different functions with could. Could you open the window? The function of this is requesting. He could be late. The function of this is showing uncertainty and possibility. When he was 7, he could ride a bike. The function of this is talking about past ability. And finally, he could go to Spain. The function of this is suggesting. So notice the same word, modal verb could, can be used in different sentences with different functions, okay? So grammar and function are related, but different functions can have the same grammar, and different grammar can have the same functions. Okay, I think I said that right. Okay, so I hope you understand a little bit more about language functions, and yeah, it's really useful for target language, and it's a useful topic for language teachers to think about. Okay, thank you.